What if your greatest strength, your compassion, is also the architect of your exhaustion? What if the very quality you have been praised for, your ability to feel for others, is the root of your resentment and your burnout? The ancient philosophers, the Stoics, reserved their strongest critiques not for the cruel or the vulgar, but for the good person living a profound error. The person who, with the best of intentions, builds their house on the sand of other people's approval. By the end of our time together, you will understand the critical difference between compulsive kindness and rational compassion, and you will possess the tools to transform the latter from a burden into a fortress. We will explore how an identity built on empathy can become a form of slavery, and how the Stoic path offers a key not to feeling less, but to being more. This is not a path of cold detachment, but of disciplined, unshakable love. Before we proceed, it is essential to establish the frame of this discussion. What we explore here is philosophy, not therapy. It is a shared inquiry into the principles of a tranquil and rational mind, not a substitute for medical advice or psychological counsel. The ideas of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca are powerful instruments for self-examination, but they are not a diagnosis or a prescription. Your life, your choices, and your well-being remain your own responsibility, to be handled with the care and professional guidance they deserve. We are here to think, to question, and to test these ancient ideas against the landscape of our modern lives. There is a modern idea, drawn from psychology, that the person we call an empath is often just the child who was never allowed to be selfish. This child, raised in an environment of emotional unpredictability, learned that their own needs were secondary. They learned that their safety and stability depended on their ability to read the room, to scan the moods and micro-expressions of their caregivers, to anticipate the storm before it broke. Their identity became a survival strategy. What looks like a profound gift of empathy is, at its root, a trauma response. It is a state of chronic, exquisite hypervigilance. The self was silenced so that others could remain comfortable. This child, now an adult, walks through the world not as a solid entity, but as a mirror, reflecting the needs, demands, and dysfunctions of everyone they encounter. They feel like a ghost in their own life, present for everyone but themselves. The Stoics would look upon this person not with scorn, but with a precise and devastating diagnosis. They would say this person has committed the fundamental error. They have built their entire psychic home on ground that does not belong to them. The first and most important principle of Stoic practice is the dichotomy of control. It is the simple but life-altering observation that some things in the universe are up to us and some things are not. What is up to us? Our judgments, our choices, our assents, our desires, and our aversions. In short, our will, our faculty of choice, what the Greeks called prohairesis. What is not up to us? Everything else. Our bodies, our health, our reputation, the economy, the weather, and most critically, the thoughts, feelings, and actions of other people. These are externals or indifferents. They are not bad or good in a moral sense. They simply are. They are the material upon which we practice our virtue, but they are not virtue itself. The person defined by this compulsive empathy has inverted this formula. They have told themselves a story. My peace is not up to me. My peace is up to my partner being happy. My peace is up to my boss being satisfied. My peace is up to my children being successful. My peace is up to my friend no longer being sad. They have taken the one thing they control, their own inner tranquility, and handed it over to 1,000 external factors, each one capricious and unstable. They have, as Epictetus warned, chained their ankle to another's will. When that person moves, they are dragged along. Is it any wonder they are exhausted? Is it any wonder they feel resentment? Resentment is the predictable emotional echo of a boundary violation, and this person has no boundaries. Their self is a city without walls. This brings us to a crucial misunderstanding of what empathy means. The modern definition often implies a kind of psychic fusion. I feel what you feel. To the Stoic, this is not a virtue, it is a contagion. Seneca, in his letters on compassion, drew a sharp line. The sage, he argued, will help the person in distress. He will give his time, his resources, his rational counsel. He will sit with the grieving widow. He will tend to the man in chains. But he will not grieve with the widow. He will not despair with the man in chains. Why? Because to do so is to add a second shipwreck to the storm. It is to double the world's suffering, not to alleviate it. If you are drowning, do you need a rescuer who jumps in and begins to drown alongside you, proclaiming, "Look, I am drowning too. This is empathy"? Or do you need a rescuer who stays firmly on the boat, who is calm, strong, and clear-headed, and who extends an oar to pull you to safety? The Stoic chooses to be the rescuer, not the second victim. This compulsive, untrained empathy is the action of the second drowner. It is a performance of kindness that is, in fact, a vulnerability. It does not help the other person. It merely validates their passion, and it destroys the self. Rational compassion, by contrast, is an action born of a judgment. The judgment is, this person is in distress. It is in my power and consistent with my virtue to assist them. The action is, I will assist them effectively and within my boundaries, without sacrificing my own governing faculty. The first is reactivity. The second is responsibility. This internal governing faculty, the hegemonicon, is the core of the Stoic self. It is the CEO of your mind. It is the pilot in the cockpit. Marcus Aurelius called it the inner citadel, a fortress of reason and tranquility that no external event can ever breach. But here is the problem. The empath, as we have defined them, the child who was never allowed to be selfish, has abdicated this post. They have left the citadel undefended. They have left the pilot's chair empty. They have organized their entire personality not around this inner fortress, but around what psychology calls the persona, the social mask we wear. The source material we're examining suggests that for the empath, this persona is the helper, the caretaker, the listener. It is a perfected mask, admired by all, but it is still a mask, and when the mask dominates, the true self, the hegemonicon, is buried. The shadow, in the Jungian sense, is not some hidden monster. For this person, the shadow is their own forbidden right to selfhood. The shadow is the simple, powerful, terrifying word, no. The shadow is the desire to put oneself first, not out of malice, but out of rational necessity. In Stoicism, this isn't a shadow. It is the atrophied will. It is the unexercised proheuresis. Every child in their development requires a natural, healthy period where their own needs are primary. This builds the foundation of a strong ego. When this is denied, the child learns that self-assertion is dangerous. No is a forbidden word. I want is a source of shame. I need is a sign of weakness. And so, these authentic impulses, anger, frustration, self-assertion, are exiled. What remains is the good child, the helpful adult, who is living as an actor in their own story. They are praised for their kindness, but they are dying of spiritual thirst. The psyche, as Jung noted, seeks balance. Nature always compensates. When one side of the personality becomes monstrously overdeveloped, like this persona of the helper, the other side will eventually force a reckoning. The Stoics knew this well. A life lived contrary to nature, contrary to reason, cannot be sustained. Gravity always wins. For the compulsive empath, this reckoning arrives as burnout. Burnout is not mere tiredness. Tiredness is the cost of a worthy effort. Burnout is the collapse of a soul. It is the body, the nervous system, and the psyche screaming in unison. This strategy is a lie. It is the moment when the helper, who has spent decades managing the pain of others, suddenly cannot do it anymore. The empathy turns to ash. The desire to help morphs into a profound, biting resentment. What looks like a breakdown is, in fact, the beginning of a breakthrough. It is the unconscious, the hegemonicon demanding a new form of life. It is the first agonizing signal that your fortress is on fire, and you are the one who lit the match. Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah was the director of a marketing department, and she was the classic office mom. Her value, she believed, was her accessibility. Her door was always open. She absorbed the complaints of her team. She mediated their personal conflicts. She shielded them from executive pressure. And she always said yes. When a junior associate missed a deadline, Sarah stayed up until 3 a.m. to fix it herself, telling herself this was leadership. She was adored. She was also perpetually exhausted, surviving on caffeine and the fumes of validation. She had made her judgment of her own worth entirely dependent on an external, her team's comfort and her boss's approval. The reckoning came during a major product launch. The demands were impossible. The timeline was absurd. But Sarah, whose no was a muscle she had never trained, agreed to it all. She worked 80-hour weeks. She stopped sleeping. She drank 6 cups of coffee a day. Her body began to fail. Headaches, heart palpitations, a constant vibrating anxiety. Her team, accustomed to her buffering, still complained. They were stressed. Why wasn't Sarah managing their stress better? 1 week before the launch, Sarah was hospitalized for what was diagnosed as a severe anxiety attack, a somatic revolt. The project was thrown into chaos. Her boss, who had previously praised her as indispensable, was furious. In her absence, the project's flaws were exposed. Her attempt to help everyone had in the end helped no one. She had sacrificed her health for a reputation, and in the crisis, she lost both. Her downfall was preventable. It was the direct mathematical consequence of a single philosophical error. She believed her function was herself. She forgot that the first duty of a director is to direct, and the first duty of a human being is to preserve the director within. Sarah's burnout wasn't the tragedy. The tragedy was the lie she had lived for 20 years. The burnout was the truth finally arriving. It was the mirror held up by nature, forcing her to see the ghost she had become. This is the moment when the question must shift. It must change from how do I care for others to how do I care for myself without shame? This is where the source material introduces the idea of sacred selfishness. The Stoics had a more precise and more foundational term for this: oikiosis. Oikiosis is the primary innate impulse of all living things. It is the principle of self-preservation, self-ownership, and belonging to oneself. First, a plant turns toward the sun. An animal licks its wounds. A human being, at the most basic level, is endowed with a primary duty of care for its own mind and body. This is not selfishness in the vulgar, grasping sense. It is the precondition for all virtue. You cannot be a good friend, a good partner, or a good citizen from a collapsed state. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot defend a community from a ruined fortress. Your first and non-negotiable duty, the Stoics would argue, is to the stewardship of your hegemonikon, your governing faculty. This is the sacred part. It is the fragment of the divine logos, or reason, that you carry within you. To neglect it, to sacrifice it for the comfort of another, is not just a strategic error. It is a form of sacrilege. It is betraying the God within. This is where the real work begins. It is the work of transforming from a slave to a sovereign. And it often begins with a delayed awakening, a harder lesson learned much later in life. Consider the case of David. David was in his late 40s, a good son to a chronically ill and emotionally volatile mother. His entire adult life had been organized around her needs. He lived in the same town, sacrificing career opportunities. He had ended 2 relationships because his partners didn't understand his obligations. He managed her finances, her appointments, and most of all, her moods. He called this duty, but the Stoics would challenge this definition. He confused fate, the fact that this was his mother, with his choices, the manner in which he responded. He believed duty meant setting himself on fire to keep her warm. This is not Stoic duty. Stoic duty is rational, bounded, and begins with the self. A Stoic would say, "It is my duty to ensure my mother is cared for. It is not my duty to be the sole instrument of that care, to destroy my own life in the process, or to be the victim of her emotional outbursts." He had failed to distinguish the task from his identity. His awakening came not from burnout, but from a health scare of his own. A routine checkup revealed a serious heart condition brought on by decades of chronic, unmanaged stress. The doctor was stark. "If you do not change your life, you will not live to see 60. David went home, stunned, and for the first time, he saw the situation with a cold, terrifying clarity. He realized, with a profound horror, that no one was coming to save him. When he told his mother about his condition, her first reaction was annoyance. Who would take her to her appointments? His illness was an inconvenience. That was the mirror. That was the moment his goodness was revealed as fear. His duty was revealed as cowardice. He was not afraid of failing his mother. He was afraid of her anger. He was afraid of the guilt. He was afraid of being called a bad son. He had chained himself to an external, her approval, and it was literally killing him. David's journey was harder than Sarah's because his chains were older and heavier. His work was to reclaim his oikiosis. He started small. He hired a part-time caregiver for his mother using her own funds. He explained it not as an attack, but as a medical necessity for his survival. His mother raged. She accused him of abandonment. She wept. She guilt-tripped. And David, for the first time in his life, did nothing. He did not absorb her rage. He did not manage her grief. He sat there in the storm of her passion and held fast to his own inner citadel. He practiced the discipline of assent. He told himself, her anger is an external. It is not mine. It is her judgment about this event, not the event itself. The event is neutral. My choice is to remain calm, to hold to my rational decision, and to act with justice. Justice to her and justice to myself. This was the real training. This was the forge. It was excruciating. It was the tearing of scar tissue. But every time he held his ground, his atrophied will, his proheresis, did one more push-up. He was slowly, agonizingly becoming a friend to himself. This is the reclamation of the shadow. It is allowing the forbidden no to surface, not as an act of aggression, but as an act of profound self-respect. When the empath begins to practice this sacred selfishness, their relationships undergo a violent, necessary recalibration. Some connections will collapse. This is a good thing. They were not relationships. They were parasitic contracts built on the silent, unstated agreement of your self-abandonment. They were built on a lie. Other relationships will deepen because they are finally rooted in mutual authenticity. The source material calls this the difference between projection and encounter. When you are the compulsive helper, you are not encountering another human being. You are projecting onto them a role, the person I must fix. You are reducing them to a problem, and you are reducing yourself to the solution. This is an act of profound arrogance, masked as kindness. You are denying them their own agency, their own hegemonicon, and you are abdicating your own. When you stand in your own sovereignty, you encounter them. You see them as a fellow sovereign, an individual responsible for their own judgments and feelings, and you are present as a fellow sovereign responsible only for your own. From this place, true connection is possible. This is what the Stoics called sympathia, the recognition of the shared humanity, the shared logos. In another, it is a connection of equal to equal. This transformation is not easy. It requires practice. This brings us to Maria, who represents a credible transformation. Maria was an artist who, after a severe burnout, much like Sarah's, and a painful family reckoning, much like David's, found herself at rock bottom. She had been the peacekeeper in her family and the free therapist in her friend group. Her art, the one thing that fed her soul, had been relegated to a selfish hobby she rarely made time for. Her transformation began with a single sheet of paper. On it, she drew a line down the middle. At the top of one column, she wrote, "What is mine? My proheresis." At the top of the other, "What is not mine? Externals." This was her new operating manual. In the mine column, she wrote, "My choice to paint today, my judgment of my work, my response to my family's demands, the boundaries I set, my assent to rational thoughts." In the not mine column, she wrote, "Whether my family understands my boundaries, whether my friends like my boundaries, whether anyone buys my art, whether the world calls my art good, my friend's emotional crisis, my mother's disappointment." She looked at this list every morning. It was her meditation. Then she began the practice. She scheduled 2 hours every morning for her art. She put it in her calendar. She treated it as a sacred, non-negotiable meeting with her own hegemonicon. At first, it felt agonizingly selfish. When she closed her studio door, she felt a wave of guilt. She imagined all the people she could be helping. This was the pathology surfacing, the old programming screaming. The Stoics would say this is the test. This is the moment of training. She had to practice voluntary discomfort, not the discomfort of a cold shower, but the psychological discomfort of prioritizing her own rational self-interest. She had to sit with the guilt and not assent to it. She had to label it. This feeling of guilt is an impression. It is a ghost. It is an echo of an old false judgment. I do not have to agree with it. My duty is here at this canvas. The first major test came a week later. Her best friend called, hysterical over a minor conflict with a co-worker. This was a classic Maria script. Her friend expected her to drop everything and talk for an hour. The old Maria would have. Her heart pounded. The old script of, I must fix this, surged. But Maria paused. She took a breath. She looked at her list. My friend's emotional state is not mine. My response is mine. She practiced a new script. I can hear you are in deep distress, she said, her voice calm and warm. I want to support you. I am in my studio time right now and cannot give you the attention you deserve. I am free at 7 p.m. Can I call you then? There was a stunned silence. Then the reaction. You're busy? But this is important. The friend was angry, confused. The unstated contract had been broken. The old Maria would have caved, apologized, and spent the next hour absorbing the anxiety. The new Maria held her ground. I know it's important to you, she said, kindly but firmly, which is why I want to talk when I can fully listen. I will call you at 7. Her friend hung up curtly. Maria's stomach was in knots. She felt like she was going to be sick. The fear of being selfish was intense, but she did not assent to it. She turned back to her canvas. She had held the gate of her inner citadel. She had detached her peace from her friend's reaction. She had encountered her friend as an individual, one who was fully capable of managing her own emotions for a few hours. What happened? A few things. Her friend, after the initial anger, called back that evening much calmer. They had a real focused conversation. Their friendship, over time, became stronger and more honest because it was no longer based on Maria's function as a release valve. And Maria's art? It flourished. She began to produce work that was authentic and powerful because it was coming from an integrated self, not a fractured persona. She had become, in the language of the source, psychologically sovereign. This is the end goal. This is the integrated personality. It is the prokopton, the Stoic word, for the one who is making progress. It is not a final destination, it is a daily practice. The integrated empath, the Stoic practitioner, is no longer a ghost. They are no longer a function, they are a presence. They are governed not by the moods of others, but by their own inner compass, their hegemonicon. Their empathy is no longer a survival reflex, a compulsion. It is an intentional act of connection. They choose when to open the gates of the fortress, and they choose when to close them. They can sit with someone in their pain, offering the profound, calming presence of an unshakable person. This is the greatest gift they can give, not their anxiety, but their peace. Their empathy is purified. It is no longer sacrifice. It is service. It is no longer a tax paid in fear. It is a gift offered in freedom. So now, let us close the loop I opened at the very beginning. What is the difference between compulsive kindness and rational compassion? Compulsive kindness is slavery. It is the action of a prohairesis, a will that believes it is not in charge. It is rooted in the false judgment that your survival depends on an external, the approval, comfort, or mood of another. It is disordered, anxious, and fragile. It leads inevitably to resentment and burnout. It is an abdication of the self. Rational compassion is freedom. It is the action of a prohairesis that knows. It is sovereign over its own domain. It is rooted in the true judgment that your duty is to act with virtue, reason, and justice. It is bounded, clear, and indestructible. It is an expression of the self, not a sacrifice of the self. The child who was never allowed to be selfish must become the adult who learns to be sovereign. This is, as Jung believed, the privilege of a lifetime, to become who you truly are. For the Stoic, it is the purpose of a lifetime. The path does not end here. Reclaiming your inner citadel is the first duty. Learning to defend it is the second. Once you have established your boundaries, you must learn to anticipate the storms that will test them. This requires more than just reaction. It requires foresight. This brings us to the next great discipline, premeditatio malorum. The premeditation of adversity. It is the practice of imagining all that can go wrong, not to create anxiety, but to extinguish it. It is the active, imaginative training that transforms our fragile fortress into an impregnable one. It is how we learn to welcome obstacles, not just endure them.